hell? One of my most favoriteest news is the Biden administration don't want immigrants to hurt themselves. They say the journey is dangerous. Mr. Papa Biden is telling them not to come for their own good.
Warmbo, why are border crossings so dangerous?
Ouchie cactuses?
No, Warmbo. Murderous U.S. policy.
Uh-oh. Mr. Cody's saying the no-no words again. Ah!
Often, anti-immigration policy is couched in concern. Obama warned parents in Central American countries not to send their children due to the danger of the border crossing.
Do not send your children to the borders. If they do make it, they'll get sent back. More importantly, they may not make it.
For reference, people send their children to the U.S. to escape murder in Central America, partly due to the rise of gang violence. And hey, would you look at that? Turns out the rise of gang violence is caused by our deportation policy. Gangs that are started in the U.S. are then exported to Central America as we deport their members. Then we blame Central Americans for desperately sending their children here because the U.S. is very good at linear thinking, the best at that. But how did the border get to be so darn dangerous? Well, starting under Bill Clinton, rapist, and continuing under Bush, Obama, Trump, and Biden, some other rapists, there's been something called Operation Gatekeeper. This is a policy of militarizing the U.S.-Mexico border, creating a deliberate death trap for migrants attempting to cross. Its stated goals were prevention through deterrence. The policy militarized areas of the border where border crossings were safer, near the California border, while having less presence to the east, near desert areas that were far more lethal. While congressional research admits that this has resulted in over 2 times the amount of deaths per year, which according to humanitarian groups estimates has killed over 10,000 people since 1994, the government's claim is that these deaths were unintentional. A real oopsie-goofer of an ethnic cleansing. Yikes-a-rooney doodle on that one, folks. But if it was a mistake, why was the stated intention of the policy a deterrence? What was the deterrence part, if not, you might die? Was the mistake that we underestimated how desperate people are to escape the poverty and violence-stricken nations ravaged by the U.S. war on drugs? People were rightly horrified by Trump's deterrence policy of family separation, kidnapping kids from their parents' arms. The cruelty was the point. But how is Operation Gatekeeper different? In this case, the cruelty is still the point. The deterrence being forcing people to suffer and die while trying to cross in more dangerous areas. So there really is a border crisis, but it's a humanitarian crisis as a direct result of our own anti-immigration policy. What do we do about it? Well, according to Trump, we're simply too full. And according to Biden, don't come here. And according to our current Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, now is not the time to come to the border. And while there's often hand-wringing about the humanitarian crisis,
we've got 15,000 kids in federal government custody. This is a humanitarian crisis.
We're simply too full to help out. As Ted Cruz writes in a Fox News op-ed, Texas is being overwhelmed by the magnitude of illegal immigrants flooding into small communities. So basically, too bad, so sad, nothing we can do about it, country's full. Which is weird because conservatives keep wanting us to have more babies, even though there's clearly no more room for those babies. That's weird. But are we really too full to be able to accept more immigrants? According to a total numbers nerd, our pal the data analyst at Cato Institute, David Beyer, even if the US had open borders with the entire Western Hemisphere, it still wouldn't get a foreign-born share equal to Australia or Switzerland, 30%. And last I checked, Australia's doing fine. Mostly. As is Switzerland.
Just take that.
It's a Swiss kangaroo? Anyway, other immigration researchers point out that demilitarization of borders, or gasp, open borders, a totally unreasonable thing that we did for the first 100 years of America, would not just increase immigration, it would lead to emigration, which you can't really tell, but I'm spelling it with an E, meaning people immigrating from the US to their home countries. According to immigration researcher and professor of sociology at Princeton, Douglas Massey, closing the borders with Mexico, instead of resulting in people staying in Mexico actually forces people searching for a better life to stay inside the US due to the risks of repeat border crossings. Paradoxically, this exponential increase in border enforcement had no significant effect on the likelihood that a Mexican would choose to initiate unauthorized migration to the United States, and it had little influence on the probability of being apprehended at the border or the odds of ultimately achieving a successful US entry. The border buildup did, however, sharply raise the costs and risks of unauthorized border crossing. In response, migrants quite logically minimized border crossing, not by staying in Mexico as the policy's architects had imagined, but instead by remaining longer in the United States once entry had been achieved, dramatically reducing rates of return migration. So opening borders might actually start to create a healthier flow of migration and equilibrium between the US, Mexico, and Central America. But even if that's not the case, does it matter? There's something that isn't brought up much when talking about whether or not immigration is good or bad or neutral for America. Not immigrants built America, or it helps the economy, or we need skilled labor, but whether we should allow immigration to happen simply because it's the morally right thing to do. The whole country's full, we can't afford immigrants take rests on a theory of US supremacy. It assumes that US citizens are superior to people born in different countries. If we can't take in immigrants because these impoverished people might use some of our resources, we're basically saying our comfort is more important than their lives. You can argue whether or not increased immigration would be good or bad for the economy, but what we're admitting then is that we value the economy over human lives, something that totally never happens.
We're crushing small business. We're crushing the markets. We're crushing this country. And what I said when I was with you that night, there are more important things than living, and that's saving this country for my children and my grandchildren.
This is something glossed over in our discussions of children in cages versus children in overflow facilities. That our whole immigration system, starting from the Page Act and Chinese Exclusion Act to what we literally called Operation Gatekeeper, is that foreigners' lives are less valuable than our own, that we see them as less than human. If you wonder how we allow the cruelty of family separations to happen, or border patrol to destroy water left out for migrants, who then die of thirst in deserts due to border policy, this is why. Our whole immigration system is based on US American supremacy and on white supremacy, and Warmo's right here, isn't he? Hey, thanks for watching that clip. Here's the evergreen end plate to ask you to like and subscribe. It's any day of the year where you are.